Living between Wednesdays, just trying to get by to the next fix. Living between Wednesdays, prefer the comics over the Netflix. Living between.
What's up, folks? I'm your host, Konrad, on Wednesday Night Reviews, and today I'm joined by the Becka, who's a local Toronto Canadian creator of comics, and she's on the show today to talk about some of her work. So Becka, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you, Konrad.
Yeah, no problem. So just to start off nice and easy, for the folks out there in YouTube land who may have no idea who you are, have never seen your name or your face, could you describe yourself?
So my name is Becka. I'm an independent comic book artist and illustrator. My book, Gehenna, Death Valley, recently won Joe Shuster Award for the Gene Day Award. That was December 2020. Since then, I ran a Kickstarter for the deluxe edition that was successfully funded. We raised over $7,000 for that. So that was for the first time. Again, thank you everybody for your help and your pledges, and thank you Sam Noir and Doodlebug Press for your help, and so on and so forth. Sorry if I forgot anybody. But yeah, a lot has been going on since, during the pandemic, and now as we're slowly coming out of it. I just did my last event yesterday at the punk rock flea market, so I'm a little, what's the word? Well, anyway, I'm still recovering. Thank goodness it was an extra hour yesterday as we're recording this. So yeah, that's everything. And I'm based in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, so I'm just a little bit outside of Toronto. That's
beautiful. Thank you for that, by the way. I always like to highlight, obviously, Canadian creators. But yeah, if you're willing to give out the specific areas, that's fantastic. So out Kitchener way. Yeah. You mentioned Gehenna, Death Valley. So yeah, can you tell us about that?
Basically how I pitch it to people, it's like Scooby-Doo goes to hell, except there's no dog, no Mr. Machine, and the monsters are 100% real. So if you're into body horror and monster movies, like I did use a little bit of inspiration from the 1950 movies, like the giant bug, or for me, tarantula was one of the inspirations for it, but just made, a modern take of it. If you're into those kind of things, like check it out. And I do have the pre-order link on my website right now if you missed the Kickstarter.
Links down below, people. Links down below.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. So one thing that just I've gone through from interviewing folks like yourself and talking about people who make comics, I find the process of making comics obviously fascinating, and everyone has their own way of doing it. Now, in previous interviews that I've read of that you've done, you've stated that you go sort of with the flow of your work and you don't really dictate, this has to happen, I have to do this next. Can you describe the process of making comics for yourself? And has it changed since you made Gehenna Death Valley #1 through, finishing Gehenna and what you're working on now?
It's definitely an evolution, the process of it. So the big difference right now between Gehenna and the work I'm currently working on is that I still do traditional, but I've been experimenting more with digital art. So I've been drawing comics on my iPad Pro, and the program I use is Procreate. So so it's been a shift, and on one hand it's faster, but on the other hand it's not as fast, just because I go with the flow, but then I change my mind a lot too. So I need to get a little bit better with managing that problem. But it's still fun. And my approach with Gehenna was just however it evolved the process, that it would just be a fun process. And I'm continuing that with future projects going forward, or what I'm currently working on. So. Yeah.
Okay. So just to confirm then, by going with the flow, you don't sort of force a particular work to be a certain way. You just kind of, as you're drawing and writing, you sort of let it naturally occur with whatever comes to mind when you're laying it all out. That's awesome.
Yeah. Sorry. And also what's different is like my work, I also allow my work or my style to evolve. So there's definitely been a shift with the art style since Gehenna too. So that's probably part of the indecision part. It's like, when I go back and look at Gehenna, the beginning pages, I'm like, my anatomy's off or whatever. But So it's just making sure that part is
Okay.
tighter and all that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I love that because it reminds me of a quote I'd heard from, I believe it's Greg Capullo, who said if you showed him the work he had done back in Spawn to compare it to now, he's like, I don't even recognize it because I'm a whole different artist. And I hope that ends up being the same for you, that you evolve so much that it's like, oh yeah, I remember doing it, but it's way different.
Yeah.
It's super
So
cool.
yeah, and that's why, with going with the flow, I just don't allow myself to be stuck in one spot. I have to, I always want to keep learning new things, right? So, and I just want to kind of try everything that I can art wise. So,
Do it. I love it. Absolutely go for it. Now, obviously, we talked about Gehenna Death Valley. It's a bit of body horror. It's definitely a horror comic. And I was not ready for it. I'm not a big horror fan to begin with, truthfully. So whenever I get into it, I'm like, okay. And it was nothing that I hit a point where I'm like, I can't read this, but it was definitely like, okay. Obviously, there's a lovely creature on the front, a little bit spider-esque, just freaky stuff. Now, one thing I wanted to ask was, so far, you've worked pretty well for your own works. It's all been horror, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much. Yeah.
So, just to dip the toes into that, where does your interest in horror come from?
That's a good question because I don't know how it happened. I didn't plan for it to happen. So originally I was into sci-fi and fantasy, basically because at home, growing up in a conservative-minded household, horror was not allowed. Halloween was not allowed. So when I got older, as a teenager, and I guess it just slowly happened, and also hanging out with friends, and then discovering, oh, this isn't bad at all. It's actually really cool. So I got deeper and deeper into it, and I still love it. So it's just, I've always had an overactive imagination. So it's just another genre where I can explore that part of my brain, I guess. I don't know if that made sense or not, but
yeah, I think that's great. Like I definitely, I click with what you mean when it comes to, you weren't allowed to see it growing up, so now it's like, when I really get into it and explore it, more power to you. One thing I had read is sort of when you'd had the chance to, you, like growing up, you read or not read, but saw Scooby-Doo and stuff like that, sort of early on, right?
yeah. Oh yeah. So it was like horror was banned, but Scooby-Doo was fine. And also murder mysteries are fine, but for some reason. But like anyone who studies film or anything like that, it's like murder mysteries, study that branch, it goes into serial killers, you can kind of see that transition when
and it just spirals.
Yeah. So it was just naturally, I'm like, okay, this, and I think like, again, the biggest surprise was like, I was actually enjoying all of this new content, that I wasn't allowed to see. And it's like, oh, it's not that bad. So I remember feeling quite proud of myself when I convinced my mother to watch The Exorcist a few years ago.
Oh.
And yeah, because in conservative circles, like in the religious circles, The Exorcist is a big no-no. You cannot watch it. There was an evangelist, I think, who was like, there was a demon living inside that camera when, whatever. According to the circles I grew up in, and it's like, that's just silly. Like, and she was quite surprised, like, oh, okay.
I love it. I'm interesting. A little bit of a tangent on that, just because of what the Exorcist is about, is the fact that there is the young priest and the old priest in that in any way like extra negative, or is it just generally because of the content?
I think it's more of the content, and I guess, back in the 70s when it first came out, like, yeah, I can see like how people were shocked or fainted or whatever when they saw the movie, right? It's because it must have been absolutely terrifying for people, and it's a slow burn movie too. And then it gets into the really creepy stuff, especially with the head spinning and everything else.
I remember going over to a friend's house when we were, 12 or 13 or something, and he showed it to me. And yeah, to this day, like the head spinning thing and the projectile vomiting, I'm like, okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. So for your work, for Gehenna Death Valley, um, one of the things obviously that comics can't do that film or TV can do, especially for horror movies, is a soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
The sounds that we naturally make, and in a horror movie, when you're getting like the killer cam with the breathing sound or the heartbeat or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you can't convey that in a comic because you can't. Well, you could, but it'd be odd to send a CD for someone's house too.
Right.
How is it different, and what are the challenges of making a horror comic for comics?
Um, I I don't know how to explain this, but I don't see it as a challenge per se. Like I can picture it in my head, and I kind of when I do the layouts, I'm always listening to music. Like for Gehenna, I had a Gehenna playlist, and I had artists I listened to that this music would match the vibe of Gehenna. So the atmosphere, I would be listening to an artist, band, or a soundtrack, whatever that would fit the vibe of what I was going for, and just capture the atmosphere of whatever I was listening to. So that's how I approach that. And I listen to things that bands or whatever that I can visualize the atmosphere.
Okay.
That makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just translate it through that with whatever I'm drawing or the color choices I use, and kind of put the pieces together. Like if you're reading, what is this person going to imagine? It's not going to be exactly the same, right? But as long as the vibe is they're creeped out, it's a win,
I mean, that's the goal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Because like for me, one of the scariest things when when watching a horror, like the remake of It,
Mm-hmm.
scared the bejesus out of me because of the soundtrack and all the weird pop-ups that happened.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, other than when you turn a page, you can't do that in a comic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always interested in how it translates, and I definitely like the approach that you've taken in Gehenna when it comes to, not like trying to make a pop-up happen, but just through what goes on in the story and some of the body horror that happens to really, creep me out, to be frank.
Yeah. 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 And then there's also some movies too, like there's other examples, but I'll just go back to The Exorcist, for example. And when I was watching it again, like I just noticed how sparse the soundtrack really was for that movie. So there's just a lot of silence. And I'm also when I'm drawing, I try to think of it like from nightmares and like sleep paralysis, if you will, just the visuals of what you're seeing and what makes it terrifying,
Yeah.
I don't know if that made sense. Hopefully it did, but yeah.
I think so, yeah, because like there's a lot of people, especially when it comes to like sleep paralysis, that something I've never experienced, mind you, but from what I've read and heard people talk about, they definitely say like it feels like, or sometimes they see stuff in their room with them and they have nightmares with it, and I'm like, okay, that's creepy. But yeah, no, it's interesting to sort of draw inspiration from that. I like that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you've worked in a couple mediums. You're going to a digital medium. Currently, what would you say you prefer, and how many different mediums have you sort of worked in?
It depends on the project right now, I'd say. So during the pandemic, how did this happen? Anyway, it happened. So I got part of this live stream event called Sketchamania. So it's like kind of a monthly charity sketching event. So, so for those, I'd like to draw analog or like just traditional with that one, because like the pieces are auctioned off, and the artist or the winner who buys the piece, they want something physical, right? And then I understand the value of that, but then also for comic books now, I'd rather just do it digital, just because I don't have to scan anything pretty much. So it's just the faster process that way, so it's everything's right there on the tablet, and I can, like the pencil, like the layouts, the pencils and the inks, no scanning required, right?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah. But like for one of the projects that's coming out soon, hopefully I'll have a date as soon as I know, but The Beholden that I worked on with Bob Sally and Drina Joe, they that comic was drawn mostly digital, but for the cover I drew it traditionally.
Oh.
Just something if someone wanted to have something to make it feel extra special, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can own like a physical original piece of the comic.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
Mm-hmm. And it feels good, like if it ever makes into a gallery or something and you see it, the original piece hanging on the wall, you know, and like prints are cool. I love prints, but it's not the same as something that you can see the ink and whatnot.
Yeah, like the original art piece itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Or a painting or whatever medium, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. So to talk about that, because there's a lot of different sort of mediums out there.
Mm-hmm.
When you do analog, is it pencil? Is it a lot of marker, pen, ink, watercolor?
Again, it depends. So for comics, it's just a traditional pencil, ink, you know, whatever. But for again, going back with the Sketchamania, so it's run by Martin Slam Duncan, and he set up his company, Slam Pressed Homes, and he's just wrapping up his Kickstarter for Dracula Visions. So he grabbed a bunch of artists together. So he assigned everybody quotes from the book Dracula, and we all painted or drew a piece from that quote based on
that's cool.
Whatever vision we see with that, right? So for that one, I just did a watercolor painting, well, mixed medium, but it's mostly watercolor. The pieces are currently at the Raid Gallery in Toronto.
Oh.
So, yeah. So for simple illustration work, I prefer to use watercolors for that. Just, you know, every once in a while.
Yeah.
I just like to do a simple illustration, just because, you know.
Yeah, I mean, must feel good. I like that. That's pretty cool. And again, the Raid Studio in Toronto is where people can go out now. People out there go out and see it and enjoy the work. That's so cool.
I forget how long the gallery is going for, but it's happening now, pretty much. So if you happen to be around that area, around Queen, definitely check it out. And there are some pieces that are for sale up there.
Beautiful.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Collector problems, cliffhangers, mysteries. You need answers. When did Batman become Green Lantern? I get it. True believer, not lying. Always up for an awesome summer crossover.